and to the next unit, which is Unit 3. The interesting thing about Unit 3 is that it is probably the most practical unit. Here, we're going to be focusing on developing teaching, learning, and assessment in the education and the training sector. And the purpose of this unit is to give you the knowledge, understanding, and skills that will allow you to develop teaching and learning programs and conduct assessments as well in the education and training sector. So we are going to look at your own practice and area of specialism, and this is the module where you are going to put your knowledge into practice. So everything that you learned in Unit 3, you are now going to apply during Unit 2. Everything you learned in Unit 2, you are now going to apply in Unit 3. So that makes it really practical as well. We are going to look into designing and delivering training sessions, evaluating them. So this is going to be a very interesting unit for you. So what I suggest we focus on now is an overview of what exactly we are going to cover in this kind of very practical unit. So we're going to start by analyzing your own practice as an education and training practitioner. So we're going to think of what is your chosen area of, for instance, facilitation. What is your chosen field? And then we're going to start looking into supporting you in designing a teaching or a training plan and delivering a session. So all those models of learning, models of curriculum development and communication, you will now have the opportunity to think about a piece of learning or training that you want to deliver as an education and training practitioner, and you will be supported in creating from scratch teaching and training plan and delivering a session, an actual session where you are going to be observed. So you have some you also receive some feedback on that. We'll also be thinking of how we could create an inclusive learning environment when you are delivering the session. So apart from identifying the area that you want to cover, the subject within your practical training session, we're also going to look into ensuring that you are creating an inclusive environment when you are delivering the session as well, because that is quite important, as an inclusive learning environment is an environment where learners are supported in feeling that they belong, and also they are supported in acquiring the necessary knowledge. So here we are going to also focus on your own professional development, your own practice, and what you have learned so far when it comes to creating an inclusive learning environment and taking into consideration the various legislation, regulations that you may need to be aware of in your own country or wherever you are located, as you prepare for delivering the session. So this is something that we are going to discuss as well during Unit 3, right? Okay, once we have identified the subject, once we have designed a training plan, a plan for the actual sessions, once we have ensured that we are taking the key legislation into consideration, and that is helping us create an inclusive learning environment, we are going to start looking into some of the models of assessment that we can decide to work with, and also some of the methods that could be appropriate depending on the learning objectives that we have set. Okay, because as part of designing and developing the teaching plan, we are going to be setting learning objectives. So there are a few questions on the screen. that we are going to be looking at whilst we are reflecting, so that we can ensure that we are picking the right assessment tools. So which evaluation model and method would be most appropriate? Will the chosen model and method support you in evaluating whether the objectives have been met, the objectives of the training session or the lesson? Also, we are going to look into how we are going to record the data that has been obtained as a result of conducting the session. So for instance, you might have delivered a particular, you might have delivered training on the topic of accounting skills. And as part of the session, you might have designed feedback forms to collect feedback from the participants in your training. And towards the end, you are going to hand out these feedback forms, you are going to collect them, and how are you going to record the data from those feedback forms so that you could use it in your own continuous professional development practice to evaluate where you can improve, but also how can you use it as a tool to inform your future actions when it comes to the effectiveness of the training you have just delivered. So all of these models, all of these things you have been learning, you now have the opportunity during Unit 3 to properly put into practice and receive feedback by the assessor who is going to be observing you delivering the session. Okay. Again, as I just mentioned, we're going to be talking about the CPD approaches. By CPD, again, we mean continuous professional development to ensure that you are continuously improving. You will be supported in identifying ways of recording your analysis and the outcomes of your self-assessment. And we're going to look into how we can create a reflective practice diary to record reflection or a reflective journal. We're also going to be talking about SWOT analysis. As SWOT analysis, SWOT is actually an acronym that could be really helpful when you are evaluating yourself, your own practice, okay? So having facilitated the session, having collected the feedback from the participants, from the learners, having recorded it, then it is about analyzing it and looking at it from the perspective of, one, how can I improve as an education and training practitioner, and two, how can the actual learning or training intervention, which by intervention I mean the session, can also be improved. Okay. And then we are going to again look at the importance of creating an environment that is inclusive. This is where we're going to focus on the Equality Act 2010. I already spoke to you about the Equality Act. This is a key piece of legislation that was introduced by the government in the United Kingdom that involves a few protected characteristics which we aren't allowed to discriminate against when we are delivering teaching, training, or generally in the workplace. So these protected characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity, and marriage and civil partnership. So during the sessions that are part of Unit 3, we are going to be looking at some of the approaches we could take when it comes to our own facilitation style to ensure that when we communicate, we aren't using any language that could be taken as discriminating against any of those characteristics. Remember, our goal as practitioners within the field of teaching and education is ensuring that our let's say trainees or learners are taking in the necessary information, which is then becoming knowledge for them, that they are improving their performance, that they are improving their skills, whatever the learning objective is. And for us to achieve that learning objective or the learning objectives, we must always be creating an environment that is fully inclusive and one that supports learning and supports development. Okay, there will be a unit specifically on the topic of equality and diversity, which we're going to talk about a little bit later today during this overview session. So now we're going